the real story of how prison gangs run the inside world. It was a cold, gray morning at Pelican Bay State Prison in California. The fog rolling off the Pacific Ocean seemed to seep into every corner of the maximum security compound, curling through the barbed wire fences, and hiding the whispers that carried more weight than the guards themselves. Somewhere in solitary confinement, a man with a hooded sweatshirt and tattoos curling up his neck flipped a carefully folded piece of paper from one hand to the other. It wasn't just any note. It contained coded instructions for a hit that would take place miles away, in a completely different prison. This was the Aryan Brotherhood, and they didn't just survive inside Pelican Bay. They thrived, orchestrating a web of violence and fear that stretched from cell block to cell block, state to state. The chaos inside Pelican Bay wasn't immediately visible. To an outsider, it might have seemed like a standard day. Inmates marching from recreation to their cells, guards counting heads with military precision. But beneath the surface, a shadow hierarchy ruled. Cell doors clicked shut, but secret tunnels of influence moved faster than any lock could contain. Contraband changed hands in the blink of an eye, shanks hidden in shoelaces, drugs tucked into rolls of toilet paper, messages written in invisible ink on seemingly innocuous paper. Every item, every handshake, every glance carried meaning. And for some inmates, obedience wasn't a choice, it was survival. Across the country in Texas, at the John B. Connolly Unit, the Mexican Mafia, known as La Im, ran a prison empire that officials could barely comprehend. Notes smuggled in food trays carried orders. Assaults, stabbings, and extortion schemes that would ripple across the outside world. One investigator recalled, "We'd confiscate a note, think we'd caught the plot, and then another note would arrive with new targets, new times, new instructions. It was like playing chess against someone who could see the entire board while we were blindfolded." It was true. La-Im had turned the prison into a machine of control, with influence reaching beyond the razor wire into the streets outside, ensuring that their grip extended well past the walls. Back in Illinois, Larry Hoover's gangster disciples were operating like a corporate enterprise inside Stateville Correctional Center. From behind the heavily reinforced walls, Hoover maintained his hierarchy, issuing orders that sparked riots, orchestrated drug operations, and managed a network of loyalists both inside and outside the prison. Investigators attempting to map the chain of command often found themselves lost in a maze of aliases, coded language, and deliberate misdirection. One federal report described it as an organized crime family in its purest, most disciplined form, with inmates as executives and guards unknowingly playing the role of middle management. Even among inmates, there were unspoken rules: show loyalty, never talk to authorities, and always respect the gang that controlled your yard. Those who violated these codes faced swift retribution. The incidents were often brutal: stabbings, beatings, sometimes killings executed with terrifying precision. But it wasn't just the violence that commanded fear. It was the certainty that every action, every movement, could be monitored and manipulated. For many prisoners, the realization that freedom from fear might never come was as chilling as any physical attack. One particular day in Pelican Bay, a newly arrived inmate noticed the subtle signs immediately: the way the more seasoned prisoners arranged themselves during meals, the nods, the stares that communicated more than words ever could. By the second week, he understood: resistance wasn't just risky, it was impossible. The gangs had already mapped his weaknesses, his fears, and his alliances. Each decision he made, each step he took, was a move in a game where the rules were written by those in power. Federal investigators had begun to take notice, but even with years of data, surveillance footage, and intercepted communications, the scale of the gang's operations was staggering. It wasn't just about drugs, extortion, or control of the prison yard. It was a full ecosystem of crime, influence, and power. They moved like shadows, invisible yet omnipresent, untouchable behind the layers of bureaucracy, security, and fear. The first chapter of this story ends in the kind of moment investigators dread most. During a routine cell inspection at Pelican Bay, a guard found a tiny, folded envelope wedged in the corner of a cell, nothing more than a scrap of paper. But when the envelope was opened, it revealed a hit list, coded instructions, and the name of a prison guard who had been targeted for weeks. The discovery sent shockwaves through the administration. The question wasn't whether the gang was powerful, it was how far their reach truly extended. How many were involved? Who could they trust? And more terrifyingly, who would be next? And as the fog rolled in off the ocean, cloaking the barbed wire in a gray haze, one chilling truth remained clear. Inside the walls of America's prisons, the real power was not in the hands of the guards, it was in the hands of the gangs. It was late evening at the John B. Connolly unit in Texas. The fluorescent lights flickered above the narrow hallways, casting long, jagged shadows across the concrete floors. In one cell, a man carefully slid a folded piece of paper under the door to another inmate, a seemingly harmless act, yet within those words were orders that could ignite a bloodbath in the next yard. Laim had perfected the art of remote command. From the shadows, they controlled the flow of contraband, assigned hits, and manipulated rival factions with terrifying precision. One slip, one miscommunication, and lives would be lost. Meanwhile, in Pelican Bay, the Aryan Brotherhood faced an unusual challenge. A rival gang had begun encroaching on their territory. Tensions that had been simmering for months boiled over one cold morning when a lone inmate was found brutally stabbed in the recreation yard. Investigators later determined that the attack had been meticulously orchestrated from solitary confinement, orders passed through coded messages, smuggled ink pens, and the prison's flawed surveillance blind spots. The brutality wasn't random. It was calculated, a warning to anyone who dared challenge their power. Illinois' Stateville Correctional Center told a similar story. Larry Hoover's gangster disciples were grappling with internal dissent. One lieutenant, feeling overlooked and ambitious, attempted to bypass the chain of command, issuing orders without authorization. The result was chaos, a brawl in the mess hall that left 4 inmates critically injured. Prison officials struggled to maintain control, but the gang's influence was so entrenched that officers often had to rely on covert negotiations with inmates to prevent further violence. Every confrontation revealed a chilling truth. Inside these walls, formal authority was powerless against the silent, omnipresent hierarchy of gangs. While violence was the most visible symptom, the gang's true strength lay in their control over the prison economy. Inmates relied on the gangs for protection, drugs, tobacco, and even food beyond the standard rations. Bribery and extortion became routine. One federal report described the prison as a shadow marketplace where loyalty was currency and fear the coin that ensured compliance. Every favor had a cost, and every act of rebellion had consequences. Escape from this network of influence wasn't just improbable, it was deadly. A key example of the shadow economy's reach occurred at Pelican Bay when a guard discovered a smuggling operation inside the prison laundry. A gang member had been concealing drugs in the seams of inmates' uniforms, distributing them across multiple blocks. Investigators traced the operation to a central cell where coded logs recorded every transaction, every buyer, every debt owed. It was sophisticated, organized, and virtually invisible to standard oversight. The lesson was clear: these gangs were not mere street criminals. They were strategists, economists, and generals operating in a world where law enforcement could barely scratch the surface. Outside the walls, the impact was equally significant. Laim's reach extended into the streets of Texas, where released inmates carried out hits and enforced debts, ensuring loyalty and fear continued beyond the prison gates. Families of gang members often became collateral, coerced into compliance, or silenced through intimidation. Investigators working these cases had to navigate not only the labyrinth of prison corridors but also a sprawling network that blurred the lines between incarceration and street crime. And yet, for all their power, the gangs were vulnerable to betrayal. Inside Pelican Bay, a member of the Aryan Brotherhood made a fatal mistake. He attempted to broker a deal with another gang without approval from his superiors. By morning, he had vanished from the cell block. Investigators later found signs of a struggle hidden behind a maintenance closet, but no body was ever recovered. Within the gang, the message was clear: loyalty was non-negotiable, and mistakes were paid for with blood or disappearance. In Texas, similar tension arose when an inmate attempted to leak information to authorities. The response was swift and brutal. Fellow gang members cornered him during recreation, inflicting severe injuries that served as a warning to all. Surveillance footage, later obtained by federal investigators, revealed a chilling level of coordination and ruthlessness. These gangs had perfected psychological control. Fear wasn't just a tool, it was a currency, exchanged daily to maintain order and obedience. By now, investigators had begun mapping the complex web linking Pelican Bay, Stateville, and Connolly unit operations. Each gang's network was interwoven, yet distinct. They communicated through letters, coded tattoos, gestures, and even contraband. The deeper authorities delved, the more they realized the gang's power was not confined to violence alone. It was a sophisticated social network that ensured survival, loyalty, and compliance at every level. And then, a breakthrough, or a nightmare, depending on perspective. During a routine security sweep at Pelican Bay, officers discovered a hidden wall compartment in the library. Inside were dozens of coded letters, weapons, and maps outlining not only movements within the prison but also external plans. The scope was staggering. The authorities realized they were witnessing a criminal enterprise operating like a corporation, with departments, strategies, and long-term goals. The gangs weren't just surviving, they were thriving, and no existing policy seemed capable of dismantling their reach. As the fog of danger thickened inside these walls, one truth emerged clearly. Inside America's prisons, gangs ruled. They controlled violence, commerce, loyalty, and fear, and even the guards, armed and trained, were sometimes pawns in a system they could barely influence. But just when investigators thought they had grasped the full scale, another discovery shook the foundation of what they believed. A letter detailing a coordinated hit across multiple prisons, including names of guards and inmates. The reach was broader than anyone imagined. The realization hit like a hammer. The real war inside the prisons was far from over, and those behind it were always one step ahead. By the time federal investigators coordinated a joint operation across Pelican Bay, Connolly Unit, and Stateville, the stakes could not have been higher. They had compiled months of surveillance, intercepted letters, and testimony from informants willing to risk their lives. Yet even with this mountain of evidence, one undeniable truth persisted. The gangs were always watching, always adapting, and always several steps ahead. At Pelican Bay, the Aryan Brotherhood had sensed the crackdown approaching. In solitary confinement, coded messages were hastily rewritten, contingency plans adjusted, and alliances tested. The prison's corridors, usually silent in the early morning fog, now pulsed with tension. Guards noticed subtle gestures, quick nods, and hurried whispers, a language invisible to the untrained eye, yet carrying lethal intent. One misstep, and the balance of power could erupt into uncontrollable chaos. Connolly Unit mirrored the same pattern. LAIM members carefully monitored their territory, ensuring that no single inmate could be coerced into cooperating with investigators. Orders were whispered under breath, smuggled in food trays, and encoded in letters disguised as mundane notes. Even the most loyal officers knew that if a gang sensed vulnerability, the consequences could be catastrophic. Murders, assaults, and orchestrated chaos were all tools in the invisible war for dominance. Stateville was a pressure cooker. Larry Hoover's gangster disciples had embedded operatives in nearly every housing unit. They monitored rival factions and communicated their intentions to members outside the walls. Every phone call, every visitor, every shipment of goods was scrutinized. Investigators attempting to dismantle the network were met with a wall of silence, intimidation, and carefully cultivated fear. One miscalculated question or misinterpreted signal could trigger a full-scale riot. The turning point came when an informant from Pelican Bay, someone who had survived gang violence for years, agreed to testify in exchange for protection. With his guidance, federal agents executed a precision operation, targeting key gang leaders during a scheduled lockdown. Every step had to be timed to the second. For the first time, law enforcement could witness the intricate mechanisms of control these gangs wielded: coded notes, hidden compartments, smuggling tunnels, and an underground network linking multiple prisons. As officers moved in, chaos erupted, but not in the way they had expected. Rather than violence erupting immediately, inmates obeyed internal rules, carefully relocating their contraband, destroying messages, and protecting each other. The investigators realized that they were dealing not with a simple criminal group, but with a highly disciplined organization operating under a rigid code. Taking down one cell would not collapse the entire structure. The network was resilient, sophisticated, and almost impossible to dismantle completely. Meanwhile, intelligence gathered from Stateville revealed shocking connections to outside criminal activity. Laim and the Gangster disciples were coordinating hits, trafficking operations, and financial schemes across state lines, all while sitting behind bars. It became painfully clear the true power of these gangs wasn't confined to prison walls. Their influence extended into cities, neighborhoods, and the lives of ordinary citizens. At Pelican Bay, a sudden discovery nearly derailed the operation. Hidden in a library wall was a ledger detailing assassination plans, financial transactions, and even names of corrupt officials suspected of colluding with gang members. The depth of corruption and organization left federal agents stunned. These were not mere street thugs. They were executing long-term strategies, managing personnel, and enforcing loyalty with the precision of a corporation, using fear as their currency. Connolly Unit wasn't far behind. An inmate who had served as a middleman for Laim revealed the network's communication hierarchy. Orders flowed from trusted lieutenants to lower-level members, ensuring that no message could be traced to the top leadership. In some cases, investigators found that gang orders had been executed before authorities even realized they existed. The meticulous planning and blind obedience created a near-perfect shield, making infiltration and dismantling nearly impossible. By the time the operation concluded, several high-ranking members were in custody, yet investigators realized that capturing leaders did not end the network's influence. Inmates who had been trained to follow the code simply reorganized. Gangs adapted, alliances shifted, and control subtly returned to the hands of those willing to assert dominance. The haunting reality became clear: no single raid could eradicate the power structure. If you think this story was intense, hit that subscribe button. You're only scratching the surface of the hidden world inside America's prisons.